Amina sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly together as she stared out of the window. The street was quiet, almost too quiet for her liking. She could see the dim lights of the houses across the road and the occasional movement of someone walking a dog or returning from the market, but there was no sign of Musa. Her husband had left for work hours ago like he did every day, yet now the sun was slowly setting and he had not come back. She felt a chill run down her spine, one that had nothing to do with the evening breeze sneaking through the slightly open window. She picked up her phone for what felt like the 100th time. Musa's number was there on the screen, and she dialed it with trembling fingers. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times and then went straight to voicemail. She left a short, urgent message, her voice cracking as she said, "Musa, please call me. Where are you?" She hung up and stared at the phone, hoping it would ring back immediately, but it remained silent. Amina tried to keep herself calm, repeating to herself that maybe he had been held up at work or that traffic was heavier than usual. But deep down, a feeling of dread started to grow, tiny at first like a seed buried in her chest. She paced back and forth looking at the clock. The minutes felt longer, stretching on, and each tick seemed to echo through the empty house. She thought about the small details of his day. He had seemed normal when he left that morning, smiling at her as he kissed her cheek goodbye, telling her he would see her in the evening. There had been no hint of trouble in his voice, no urgency, no fear. That normalcy made the silence now feel even stranger and heavier. It made her wonder, how could someone so ordinary just disappear? The neighbors, she realized, had begun to notice something was wrong. Through the window, she could see Mr. Bello next door peering over his fence, his eyebrows knitted together in concern. Mrs. Adama from across the street had come out onto her porch, glancing toward Amina's house and whispering to her own husband. Amina felt her face heat up. She didn't want the neighbors to see her panic, but she also longed for someone to tell her that everything was going to be okay. She tried calling Musa again, each ring sounding louder than the last in the quiet house. Still nothing. She left another message, this time longer, more desperate. "Musa, I'm really worried. Please answer me. I don't know what to do." After sending it, she sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. The thought that something terrible could have happened to him clawed at her stomach, making it hard to breathe. Her mind raced. She tried to think logically. Could he have had an accident on the way to work? Did someone stop him? Was he hurt somewhere? The possibilities were endless, and each one seemed worse than the last. She had no way of knowing what had happened. She felt completely alone in her worry, though she knew the neighbors were watching, whispering, and noticing her distress. Hours passed, and darkness crept over the neighborhood. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows that made her feel even more unsettled. The familiar sounds of evening, the distant barking of a dog, a car driving slowly down the street, the occasional laughter from a neighbor's home, felt strange tonight, almost hollow, as if the world itself were holding its breath with her. Her phone buzzed suddenly and she jumped. It was a message from Musa's friend, Ade. It read, "Hey, have you heard from Musa today?" Amina quickly replied, typing with shaking fingers, "No. He hasn't come home. I've called him so many times. I don't know where he is." There was a pause before Ade replied again, "That's not good. Maybe we should check his office?" "I don't know. Something feels off." Amina's heart pounded. She had tried to convince herself that he was just late, but now, hearing Ade's concern, the thought that something serious could have happened became harder to ignore. She debated calling the police but hesitated, thinking maybe it would seem dramatic if he was just late. But as she sat there, staring at the phone and the quiet street outside, the doubt disappeared. Something was wrong and she could not ignore it any longer. She finally called the local police station. The officer who answered listened patiently as she explained the situation. "We'll send someone to take a report," the officer said. "Can you tell us the last time you saw him and anything unusual you noticed?" Amina recounted the morning, the goodbye kiss, the ordinary day that suddenly had become terrifyingly unusual. After hanging up, she felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief that someone was now aware of Musa's absence. Fear because it meant the situation was serious enough to involve the police. She walked through the house, checking each room, each corner. Everything looked normal, just as it always did. His shoes were by the door, his keys were on the counter, and his work bag was neatly placed near the living room. Nothing seemed out of place, but that only made his absence feel stranger. The night grew colder, and Amina wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, trying to calm herself. She went to the window again, looking down the street for any sign of him. A gentle wind rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, and she shivered. She called his phone once more, even though she knew it would probably go unanswered. When it did, she sank back into the chair, exhausted from pacing, calling, worrying, and imagining everything that could have gone wrong. By midnight, Amina was barely keeping herself awake. Her neighbors had started to turn in for the night, but she could not. She felt trapped in the house, surrounded by the silence that now felt heavy and suffocating. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards made her jump. She wanted to believe he would walk through the door at any moment, smile at her, and explain that he had been held up at work or delayed by some small problem. But deep down, a terrible fear gnawed at her heart. In the early hours, when the street was empty and the stars shone faintly above, she sat on the sofa and whispered his name into the quiet. "Musa, where are you?" Her voice echoed slightly in the empty rooms and no answer came. Her eyes filled with tears, and she felt a strange mix of hope and despair. Hope that he would return safely, despair that maybe something terrible had happened to him. As dawn approached, the street slowly came to life. The first car drove past, birds chirped from nearby trees, and people began to step out of their homes. But Musa was still nowhere to be seen. Amina felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. She realized that this was only the beginning of a long, frightening wait. She had no answers, only the silent streets and her growing fear. The neighbors' whispers grew louder as they noticed her anxiety. The quiet shock that had settled over the community seemed to mirror her own inner turmoil. Amina knew she could not sleep. She had to do something, anything, to find Musa. Her thoughts swirled with worry, imagination, and the tiniest glimmer of hope. Somewhere, somehow he had to be safe. She had to believe that. And yet, as she watched the street, she could not shake the feeling that this night, this disappearance, would change everything in her life forever. The morning after Musa's disappearance, Amina barely slept. Her eyes were red and heavy, her mind spinning with worry. The sun rose slowly, but it brought little comfort. She had called the police the night before, and now she waited as officers arrived at her small, tidy house. They introduced themselves politely, their faces serious, and began asking questions. Amina answered as best as she could, telling them when Musa had left for work, what he had worn, and anything unusual she had noticed. The officers took notes carefully, nodding but saying little. One of them, a kind-looking man named Inspector Daniel, asked Amina to think about Musa's habits, his friends, and his routines. "Did he seem worried about anything lately? Did he mention problems at work?" he asked. Amina paused. There had been nothing obvious, but now that she thought back, she remembered small things. Musa had been quieter than usual over the past few days, sometimes staring at his phone for long periods. He had smiled and joked, but there was a tension in his face she could not understand at the time. The officers left Amina's house with a promise to investigate further. That same morning, she decided she needed to know more herself. She called Musa's workplace, pretending to be calm even though her voice trembled. The receptionist told her Musa had not arrived that day, which confirmed her growing fear. She asked a few more questions and learned that some of his co-workers had noticed him acting strangely lately. Amina felt a chill run down her spine. Something had changed in Musa's life, and she had not known what it was. Later that day, Amina went out to speak with the neighbors. Mrs. Kamara, who lived 2 houses down, said she had seen a strange car parked near their street early that morning. "It was black," she said, wringing her hands. "I didn't think much of it at first, but now, I wonder if it had anything to do with Musa." Amina thanked her quietly, but her heart raced. Why would someone unfamiliar be near their house, and why had she not noticed it? Every small detail suddenly seemed important. Amina returned home, feeling restless. She wandered through the rooms, touching things that Musa had touched just hours before. His shoes, his keys, his coat, all normal, all in place. But when she opened a drawer in his study, she discovered something unexpected. There were small folded notes tucked between his files. She picked them up, careful not to unfold them too quickly. Each was written in Musa's neat handwriting, but the words seemed strange, like pieces of a puzzle she could not solve. Some had addresses, some names, some numbers, and a few were just short phrases that made no sense to her. She sat on the floor, reading them again and again. Why had he hidden these notes? And why now, when he was gone? Amina felt a wave of unease settle in her chest. These notes suggested he had been thinking about something important, something private, something he had not shared with her. The thought stung, but fear overcame curiosity. She had to understand. Amina tried to organize the notes on the table. One mentioned a place she had never heard of, another had a time written beside it. Some looked like reminders, others like warnings. The more she examined them, the more questions arose. Who was he meeting? What was he worried about? And most importantly, why had he disappeared without telling her anything? The phone rang and Amina jumped. It was Ade, Musa's friend who had called her the previous night. "Amina, any news?" he asked quickly. She told him about the notes and the strange car, and he said he would come over. Within an hour, Ade arrived, a tall, serious-looking man who always seemed to notice things others missed. He looked around the house, his eyes lingering on the notes. "These are important," he said quietly. "Musa wouldn't leave them unless he wanted you to see them. Maybe he wanted you to find something." Amina felt a mix of relief and worry. Relief that someone was helping her, worry that Musa had planned something without her knowing. They went through the notes together, trying to make sense of them. They compared the names, the addresses, and the times. Slowly, patterns began to appear, but they were confusing and incomplete. It was like trying to put together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. As they worked, Amina's thoughts kept returning to the strange car Mrs. Kamara had seen. She wondered who could have been watching their house. Was it connected to Musa's disappearance? She mentioned this to Ade, and his expression grew serious. "We need to be careful," he said. "If someone is involved in this, they might still be around." Amina nodded, feeling a new layer of fear settle over her. She realized the world outside their small home could be dangerous in ways she had never imagined. That evening, Amina went back to Musa's study, trying to think clearly. She picked up one note that mentioned a place on the outskirts of town. She had never been there and didn't know what she would find, but something inside her told her it was important. She tucked it into her pocket, planning to investigate carefully when she could. The house felt empty without Musa, and every sound, the wind brushing against the walls, the creaking of the floorboards, made her jump. Hours later, the police called with an update. They had spoken to Musa's co-workers, and everyone mentioned the same thing. He had been distracted, almost anxious, in the days leading up to his disappearance. No one knew why, but it had been unusual enough to notice. Amina wrote down everything, trying to see a connection. The police also promised to check surveillance cameras around the neighborhood, hoping the strange car might be caught on tape. Amina felt a small relief, but her worry never fully went away. During the night, she could not sleep again. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had Musa gone somewhere on purpose? Was he in trouble? Did he leave clues for her to follow? She remembered the notes and tried to decipher them in her mind, thinking of every possible meaning. Every name, every number, every word could be a hint, she thought. Every sound in the house seemed louder, sharper, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets. The next morning, she met Ade at the house again. They reviewed the notes once more, writing down every detail they could find. Ade suggested checking some of the addresses, places Musa might have visited. Amina agreed, though fear gripped her heart. She had to know something, anything about where he could be. She felt like she was chasing shadows, but she could not stop. Musa's safety depended on it. As they prepared to leave, a neighbor came by unexpectedly. "I didn't want to bother you before," he said, "but I saw a man standing near Musa's car yesterday. I couldn't see his face, but he didn't look familiar. Maybe it's nothing, but I thought I should tell you." Amina thanked him, her heart beating fast. Everything now seemed connected. The notes, the strange car, the distracted co-workers, the mysterious man. Something bigger was happening, and she had no idea how deep it went. Amina spent the rest of the day searching, calling friends, retracing Musa's usual routes, and trying to find anything unusual. The neighborhood seemed the same, but her eyes caught details she had never noticed before. A neighbor looking out the window too long, a car parked in the same place for hours. Her mind worked constantly, piecing together small fragments, hoping they would lead to Musa. Amina tried to focus on small tasks around the house, cleaning and organizing, but her mind kept returning to Musa and the mysterious notes. Everything felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were hiding secrets. She moved slowly through the living room, her eyes scanning the floor and furniture for any details she might have missed before. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up Musa's books, his pens, and the small objects that seemed ordinary but now felt full of meaning. When she reached his drawer, she hesitated for a moment. She had gone through it once already, but something inside told her to check again. Carefully, she opened it and her eyes fell on a folded envelope she had not noticed before. It was plain, unmarked, and seemed out of place among the neatly stacked papers. Amina's heart began to beat faster. She picked it up and examined it, feeling the smooth texture of the paper. There was no stamp, no writing, nothing that indicated where it had come from. She unfolded it slowly. Inside were several items. A few folded letters, printed documents, and a couple of tickets for events she did not recognize. The letters were written in Musa's neat handwriting, though the contents made her head spin. They hinted at a project he had been working on, something important, secretive, and far beyond his normal office work. The tickets were for meetings and locations she had never heard of, some outside their town. Her hands shook as she read and her chest tightened. Could Musa have gone somewhere voluntarily? She tried to tell herself it was possible. Maybe he had wanted to surprise her or was dealing with something he did not want to worry her about. But another thought crept in, darker, heavier. Was he in trouble? Was someone after him? Amina's mind could not decide. She felt torn between hope and fear. She spread the papers on the table, arranging them as best she could. Each letter seemed to add more questions than answers. One mentioned a place on the outskirts of town with a time and a small note, "Do not tell anyone." Another referenced a meeting with names she did not recognize. Amina tried to understand what Musa was involved in, but the information felt incomplete, like seeing a picture with missing pieces. As she read the letters again, trying to memorize every detail, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The house suddenly felt colder, emptier, and more suspicious. The walls, which had always felt safe, now seemed like they were hiding secrets of their own. She looked around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, watching her. The thought made her stomach churn. Then came a sudden knock at the door. It was light but deliberate, and it made her jump. Her heart raced so fast she thought it might burst. She froze, listening, straining to hear any other sound outside. There was nothing, only the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Another knock followed, harder this time, and Amina instinctively moved closer to the door. She peeked through the small window and saw no one. The street looked empty, the houses quiet. Fear and caution battled within her. Who could it be? A neighbor checking in? A stranger? Someone connected to Musa's disappearance? She knew she had to be careful. She locked the door and held the envelope close to her chest, her fingers gripping it tightly as if it could protect her. Her mind spun with questions. Someone was watching her house. Someone knew about Musa or about what he had been working on. Amina sat down on the sofa, her back against the wall, and tried to calm herself. She reread the letters, trying to find clues that could explain why someone might be outside. Maybe they wanted the envelope, or maybe they were trying to see if she had found it. Each possibility made her more anxious. She wondered if Musa had known this could happen, and if that was why he had hidden the notes in the first place. The next few hours were tense. Every sound, the wind brushing the windows, a car passing by, the distant barking of a dog, made her jump. She kept looking at the envelope, unwilling to put it down, unwilling to let go of the small piece of Musa's life that had been left for her. It was the only connection she had to him right now, and she could not risk losing it. As the sun began to set, Amina decided she needed help. She called Ade, Musa's friend, explaining what she had found and the knock at the door. Ade arrived quickly, his expression serious. When he saw the envelope and the letters, he understood immediately. "These are important," he said. "Musa wanted you to find them. He trusted you to figure this out." Together they examined the papers again. Ade helped her make sense of some of the letters, pointing out patterns and details that Amina had missed in her fear. One letter referenced a location and a time, another mentioned a person Musa had to meet. Ade suggested they write everything down and try to connect the pieces. Amina agreed, feeling slightly more in control, though worry never left her chest. While they worked, the thought of the knock at the door returned. Who had been watching her? Was it connected to Musa's secret project? She asked Ade and he frowned. "It's possible," he said. "We should be careful. Whoever it is might still be around. They could know Musa left something for you." Amina nodded, understanding that her life had become part of a larger puzzle, one that was still unfolding and full of unknowns. Night fell and Amina could not sleep. She kept the envelope close, rereading the letters again and again, trying to understand Musa's intentions. Each word felt heavier than the last, full of meaning she could only guess at. She realized Musa had been living a part of his life she had never known about, something important and secretive, and now that part was reaching out to her in his absence. The next day, Amina decided to follow some of the clues. She and Ade planned to visit one of the locations mentioned in the letters, a place on the outskirts of town that seemed significant. Her stomach twisted with anxiety, but she felt a strange determination as well. She could not sit idle while Musa was missing. She had to act even if it was frightening. Before leaving, Amina checked the house again, making sure the door was locked and the envelope safe. She felt eyes on her, a lingering sense that someone might still be watching. The previous night's knock had left a mark in her mind. She wondered if they would come again or if they had already seen enough. Every shadow felt suspicious, every sound a warning. When she and Ade drove toward the location mentioned in the letters, Amina stared out the window, watching the familiar streets give way to unfamiliar roads. Her mind was full of questions. What was Musa doing here? Who had been outside her house? Was she walking into danger? Fear mixed with determination in her chest, and she clenched her fists to steady herself. They arrived at a quiet area far from the town center, with few houses and mostly empty land. Amina felt a chill, but she stepped out of the car. Ade stayed close, protective as they approached the building mentioned in the letter. It was old but well kept, with no sign of people outside. They paused, looking at each other, unsure of what they might find inside. Inside, the building was dimly lit but seemed safe. Amina's heart pounded as she explored, looking for clues or signs of Musa. Everything was quiet, except for the faint sound of wind through broken windows. She felt a mix of hope and fear. Amina had barely slept the night before. Her mind kept turning over the letters, the notes, and the mysterious envelopes Musa had left behind. Each clue she had uncovered seemed to point to something bigger, something she did not fully understand yet. But she had made up her mind, she would follow the clues no matter where they led. With Ade by her side, she gathered the notes, double-checked the addresses, and prepared to leave. The early morning light was still pale, and the streets were almost empty, as if the town itself were holding its breath, waiting with her. The drive to the outskirts of town was long and quiet. Amina sat in the passenger seat, gripping the letters tightly, her eyes scanning every corner, every passing car. Her heart beat quickly, not only from fear but from hope. Somewhere ahead, the trail of Musa's clues promised answers. Every time she thought about finally seeing him, her chest tightened with anticipation. Ade drove steadily, keeping an eye on the road, but he seemed tense as well, glancing at her occasionally. When they arrived at the old community center, Amina's first impression was that it looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, the windows were dusty, and the doors creaked slightly in the wind. Yet something about the place felt purposeful, as if it had been chosen carefully. She stepped out of the car, clutching the envelope close to her chest. Her stomach fluttered with nervous energy. Was Musa really here? Or was it another false lead? They approached the entrance slowly. Ade held the door open for her and they stepped inside. The interior was quiet and dimly lit by the morning sun filtering through dusty windows. The smell of old wood and paper filled the air, making Amina wrinkle her nose. She called softly, "Musa?" Her voice sounded small and unsure in the large empty room. There was no answer at first, just the echo of her own words. Then, from a corner, a figure emerged. Musa stepped forward, looking exhausted but unharmed. His clothes were slightly wrinkled, and his hair was a little messy, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw her. "Amina," he said, his voice weary but filled with relief. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck, feeling tears well up. He held her tightly as if to make sure she was real, that she was safe. After a few moments, they stepped back slightly so they could look at each other. Amina's eyes searched his face, trying to understand why he had disappeared, why he had left her so worried. Musa took a deep breath and began to explain. "Amina, I had to leave," he said. "I was working on something at my office, something important. There were people doing things they shouldn't, and I needed to find evidence. If anyone knew I was looking into it, it could have put you in danger too." Amina listened, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of the fear and worry she had carried for days. She felt relief that he was safe, but also shocked that he had kept this from her. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "I was so worried." Musa's eyes softened. "I wanted to tell you but I couldn't. If they knew I was telling anyone, even you, it could have put you at risk. That's why I left the notes, the letters, and the tickets. I hoped you would find them and follow the trail, but safely. I never wanted you to be in danger." His voice was quiet, filled with regret and care. Amina's mind raced. She thought about the envelope, the letters, and the tickets she had followed, all the while wondering what he had been doing. Now it made sense. The clues were his way of guiding her without putting her in harm's way. Every step she had taken had been planned by him. She felt a mixture of relief, awe, and a little anger. How could he carry so much responsibility alone, keeping secrets that worried her so much? Musa led her to a small table where more papers and files were neatly arranged. He explained that he had been documenting irregularities at his office, gathering evidence of corruption and dishonesty. The project had been risky. Certain people did not want their actions revealed, and Musa had to be very careful. If he had been discovered too early, it could have endangered not only him but everyone close to him, including Amina. Amina touched the papers, feeling the weight of what he had done. These were not ordinary documents. They were proof, evidence, and a record of courage. She realized how brave he had been, how carefully he had planned his steps, and how much he had risked without telling her. Her chest tightened with a mix of pride and worry. She looked at him and whispered, "You were brave, Musa, but I was so worried." Musa smiled faintly, his eyes tired but kind. "I know, Amina. I never meant for you to be scared. That's why I left clues for you. I had to make sure you would be safe while still finding your way to me." She nodded, understanding finally. Each note, each hidden message, each folded letter had been a thread connecting them, keeping her involved but safe. They spent hours together in the quiet community center. Musa explained every detail of his project carefully, answering Amina's questions and showing her the documents he had collected. Ade helped them organize the papers, making lists and notes so that everything would be easier to understand. Amina felt a mix of emotions, relief that Musa was safe, admiration for his bravery, and a deep sadness for the days she had spent in fear. As the day wore on, Musa explained why he had to remain hidden for a while longer. "Some of the people I was investigating are still watching," he said. "I had to make sure it was safe before I returned home. I couldn't take the risk." Amina nodded, realizing the seriousness of the situation. She understood now that his disappearance had not been random, but a calculated step to protect both of them. Even as she felt relief, she could not forget the fear she had endured. The nights of worry, the calls to the police, the silence of the house, all of it had left marks on her. She realized how fragile their sense of safety could be, how much the world could change in a single moment. She felt grateful that Musa had returned safely, but also aware that life might never feel the same again. Musa noticed her quiet reflection and took her hand gently. "I wanted to protect you, Amina. That's why I stayed away, why I left the clues. I never wanted you to be in danger, and I wanted you to trust yourself enough to follow the trail safely." She squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his presence and the care behind his words. Amina looked at him, her mind replaying the past few days, the panic, the strange car, the hidden notes, and the sudden knocks. All of it had been part of a larger plan, a plan Musa had created to keep them both safe. She felt a deep appreciation for him, mixed with amazement at how much he had endured quietly. As they prepared to leave the community center, Musa reminded her that the situation was not yet fully resolved. "We need to be careful," he said. "But at least now we know the truth. We can face it together." Amina nodded, feeling a renewed sense of strength. They had survived the mystery, and now they could face whatever came next with knowledge, courage, and trust. When Amina and Musa finally returned home, the streets felt strangely familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The houses, the trees, the sidewalks, they were exactly as they had left them, yet everything had changed. People had seen them arrive, and whispers quickly spread through the neighborhood. Some neighbors stepped outside their doors to catch a glimpse of Musa, their faces a mix of surprise, relief, and curiosity. Amina held his hand tightly, feeling a strange mix of joy and lingering fear. The moment they walked through the front gate, a few neighbors hurried over. "Musa, you're safe," called Mrs. Kamara, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We were so worried." Others nodded and murmured their relief. Amina smiled politely, though inside she still felt a mix of emotions she could not easily name. Relief, joy, shock, and a lingering fear all tangled together, like threads that would take time to untangle. Musa looked around, smiling faintly at the familiar faces. He nodded in acknowledgement, but his focus remained on Amina. She was the first person he wanted to see, the first person whose safety had always mattered most to him. They embraced quietly in the small front yard, their hug long and steady, a silent exchange of reassurance, love, and relief. Amina felt the tension she had carried for days begin to ease, though the memory of the uncertainty still lingered. Inside the house, Amina and Musa set the envelope and the letters on the dining table. They were symbols of the days that had passed, of the fear and suspense, and of the careful steps Musa had taken to protect her and uncover the truth. Musa explained once again calmly that everything he had done had been meant to keep them safe while addressing the corruption he had discovered at work. His careful planning, the notes, and the hidden clues had been designed so that Amina could follow without ever being in harm's way. Amina listened, her mind slowly absorbing the full picture. She realized how much he had risked alone, how carefully he had thought about her safety, and how much trust he had placed in her without saying a word. She felt admiration for him, a deep gratitude, and a little awe at the courage he had shown. At the same time, she understood the magnitude of her own experience. The hours of fear, the constant worry, the sleepless nights that had seemed endless. The neighborhood continued to buzz. Friends, neighbors, and even distant acquaintances stopped by to check on Musa and Amina. Everyone wanted to hear the story, and as word spread, the shock and amazement grew. Musa had been missing for days and no one knew where he had gone or why. Now the truth was slowly coming out. He had been working secretly not for personal gain, but to protect the community, uncover wrongdoing and prevent harm. People shook their heads in disbelief, murmuring to one another, unable to fully comprehend the risks he had taken. Amina sat quietly in the living room for a few moments, thinking about everything that had happened. She remembered the first night, sitting by the window watching the empty street and calling Musa's phone again and again. She remembered the strange car, the hidden notes, the envelope, and the suspense that had made every sound in the house feel like a warning. The fear had been real, almost unbearable, but now it felt distant, like a shadow that had passed but left its mark. Musa joined her on the sofa and took her hand gently. "I know it was hard for you," he said softly. "I never wanted you to be scared. But I couldn't tell anyone, not even you, until it was safe." Amina nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She understood now, more than ever, how much he had thought about her safety, and how carefully he had planned every step. Over the next few days, life slowly began to return to normal. Musa resumed his work, though he was more cautious now, and Amina returned to her daily routines, though everything felt different. Even the simplest activities, cooking, cleaning, walking through the streets, felt charged with new awareness. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before, small details that reminded her how fragile life could be, and how important trust, love and courage were in the face of uncertainty. The envelope and letters were carefully stored in a safe place, a reminder of the ordeal they had survived and the lessons they had learned. Amina often looked at them, feeling the weight of the days they represented. She realized that the suspense and fear had been terrifying, but they had also revealed the strength of her bond with Musa. They had been tested and they had passed. Their trust in one another had deepened, and their love had become stronger because of the ordeal. Neighbors continued to visit occasionally, asking questions and expressing their admiration. Musa answered carefully, sharing some details but keeping the most sensitive information private. Everyone seemed to respect the courage it had taken for him to act, and for Amina to follow the trail of clues with bravery and determination. They had both become figures of quiet admiration in the community, people who had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear with courage and wisdom. Amina spent time reflecting on her own experience. She remembered the nights she had stayed awake, worrying, calling the police, examining the notes, and trying to follow the trail Musa had left for her. Each step had been challenging, but it had also taught her something about herself. She had learned patience, careful thinking, and the importance of remaining calm under pressure. She had learned that fear could be overcome, and that love and trust could guide her even in the darkest moments. Musa noticed her quiet reflection and gently squeezed her hand. "You were brave too," he said. "You followed the clues, stayed safe and trusted yourself. I couldn't have asked for anyone better." Amina smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. The fear and tension of the past days had created a bond that was unshakable, a connection that went beyond words. As the days turned into weeks, the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of Musa's disappearance and the courage it revealed remained. People occasionally mentioned it in conversation, expressing amazement at what had happened, but the fear and suspense gradually faded. Life continued, but it had a new layer of meaning for Amina and Musa. They had faced uncertainty, danger, and the unknown, and they had survived together. Amina and Musa spent quiet evenings together, talking about their experiences, sharing thoughts, and planning for the future. They had learned to appreciate each day more, to value the safety and presence of each other, and to recognize the strength that comes from trust and love. Every simple gesture, holding hands, sharing a meal, walking together, felt richer, more meaningful because they had endured fear and uncertainty and come out stronger. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the neighborhood, Amina felt a deep sense of peace. The whispers of the neighbors, the strange cars, the hidden letters, and the fear of Musa's absence all felt like a distant memory. She held his hand, looking into his eyes, and realized that the ordeal had changed them, but in a good way. They were stronger, closer, and more aware of the fragile beauty of life. The envelope and letters remained in the house, a quiet reminder of the suspense, the fear, and the courage that had carried them through those days. Amina often thought about how much Musa had risked, how carefully he had planned, and how important it had been for her to trust herself and follow the clues. She felt a sense of gratitude not just for his safety, but for the lessons she had learned about courage, love, and trust. Neighbors still occasionally approached them, asking questions and expressing concern or admiration, but Amina and Musa had found their rhythm. They could smile, talk calmly, and explain what needed to be said without reliving the fear. They had survived something intense and unknown, and they had done it together. Their bond was unbreakable and they both knew it. Amina sometimes thought back to the first night, when Musa had not come home, and she had stared out the window watching the empty street, feeling helpless. Now she could see how far they had come. The fear had been real, but so had the courage. The suspense had been terrifying, but so was the relief and understanding that followed. And through it all, their love had endured and grown stronger. As the neighborhood quieted for the night, Amina and Musa sat together, reflecting on what had happened. The streets were calm, the air gentle, and the world seemed safe again. They held each other closely, feeling a deep sense of connection and trust. They knew that life would continue, that challenges might come, but they were ready to face them together. Amina realized she would never forget the suspense, the fear, or the lessons learned. Those days had changed her, had shown her the strength of trust, courage, and love. And as she looked at Musa, safe, strong, and full of care, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, stronger than ever.